Michael McMahon was a decorated NYPD officer and devoted family man. After retiring, he became a private investigator. Now, he's been convicted of working for the Chinese government as part of Operation Foxhunt, a secret global campaign by China to track down and pressure dissidents living abroad. Yet Michael insists he's innocent, claiming he was simply doing his job and had no idea about any international plot. He now faces 18 months in prison. On today's Dr. Phil podcast, I'll talk with Michael, his wife, and former FBI agent who spent over 20 years investigating the Chinese government. Could Michael's case expose hidden flaws in our justice system and make us question just how fair and impartial justice really is? Stick around. This is a conversation you do not want to miss. A decorated NYPD officer, now he's been convicted of working for the Chinese government. What's happening here should alarm every American.
There was nothing illegal. It's mind-boggling to me that they would go after me for doing legal private investigator work. I feel betrayed by my country.
I think everybody that sees this should be outraged, absolutely outraged. You know, we all hear stories about heroes, people who put their lives on the line every day to keep us safe. Mike McMahon was one of those heroes, a decorated NYPD cop with 78 medals, a devoted dad and husband who spent over 14 years protecting the streets of New York. After he retired, Mike became a private investigator, a job thousands of people do legally every day. So how does a man like Mike go from hero to federal convict? How does someone with that kind of service end up accused of spying for the Chinese government? The U.S. government says he was part of Operation Foxhunt, a secret effort by China to intimidate dissidents here in the U.S. Mike says that's just not true. He says he was hired for a normal job to find someone and had no clue it had anything to do with China. And yet, he was prosecuted, convicted, and is now facing 18 months behind bars. He believes he was set up by his own government in a political game he did not know he was playing. When people start to believe the justice system is political, it's not just dangerous, it's destabilizing. Once trust is gone, everything else unravels. Is that what happened to Michael?
The Justice Department says it's cracking down on China's so-called Operation Foxhunt. The little-known operation is Beijing's self-described anti-corruption campaign targeting Chinese fugitives living in other countries, including the U.S. Last month, a federal jury in New York convicted 3 men of stalking a New Jersey family on behalf of the Chinese government. Among the defendants, Michael McMahon, a former New York City police officer turned private investigator. Prosecutors say the years-long plot involved targeting a former Chinese official and his family living in the U.S. McMahon says he had no idea this job had any ties to the Chinese government, and the Department of Justice, he says, used him as a scapegoat.
Mike, thank you for being here today. I'm glad to have an opportunity to talk this through.
Okay, thank you so much for having me.
I want everybody to understand this, and I want to be sure I understand what has been alleged here. And let me say it and see if I get it. What you are alleged to have done here is been hired by the Chinese government to track down people that have turned against the Chinese government living in the United States and to harass them, create problems for them, do what with them? But first off, is that right? The allegation is that you worked with the Chinese government to track down people that lived in the United States but were anti-Chinese government. Is that correct?
That's the government's version of it. What I was hired to do was basically a civil matter, civil issue. I was hired by a local company out of Queens, New York, to locate a person who stole assets from a construction company in China. They had information he was living here in New Jersey. So what I did in all my cases, I got the information. I hired 2 additional NYPD detectives, and we did surveillance and background checks. And it was basically a civil issue. There was no criminality assigned to this case whatsoever. The government, criticized or criminalized PI work. This is what we do day in, day out: background checks, surveillance. This case was similar to every other case I work on. So for the government to accuse me of doing criminal acts in my everyday job was very, very upsetting.
What they say made it criminal was that you were working for the Chinese government to find these people that were dissidents, that had a political agenda against China. That's what they say made this political, made it criminal, made you an agent for the Chinese government. That's their, I'm not saying that's right. I'm just saying that's
Right.
their theory.
Yeah, the people who hired me was a Queens-based New York firm. I met with the clients. They spoke perfect English. One lived in Connecticut, one lived in Queens. There was no indication they worked as CCP officials or working for the government of China. There was not one text message. There's not one email that says anything about CCP agents or CCP government officials, nothing to that whatsoever. I had no idea they had connections to China and the CCP.
Did they give you any information about them being anti-CCP or having any political
Negative.
leanings one way or the other?
No, this wasn't my job. There was nothing that led me to believe it was a political. They were political dissidents. All the information I had was that they were criminals living here in New Jersey. I uncovered, numerous real estate transactions throughout California, New Jersey, and I told my clients, your money, your stolen money, is in this one LLC.
Okay, but you say it wasn't criminal, it was civil. They had committed criminal acts, but your involvement was civil because they were going to sue to get their money back?
Correct.
And when you found them, did they know where the people were? I mean, they were in business, right?
We had information they probably knew where they were, but they wanted to hire a licensed private investigator to do legal PI work and to do basic background asset searches and basic surveillance. So we did surveillance for about 5 days. We saw the subject for about 60 minutes over the 5 days. And that was pretty much the extent of what I did.
Did you do a paper chase as well as observe them?
We did asset searches. We did background searches. We did information on the house, who paid the mortgage, who owned the house, and stuff like that.
Things that you would do if someone was getting ready to sue and look for assets to recover.
Yes.
Okay. And you gave that information to the Queens-based company.
Yes.
What is illegal about that?
There was nothing illegal. And that's why I'm puzzled. That's why I can't believe I'm here. I can't believe I was arrested. It's mind-boggling to me that they would go after me for doing legal private investigator work.
And why do you think you were targeted? Why you? Why not somebody else? Why anybody doing this kind of work? But why do you think they targeted you in particular?
I don't think the FBI knew what they were doing. They probably thought what I did was not in the scope of PI work. I don't think they were educated enough in my business of what I do as a part of my living. And I don't think they were informed about what legal things I could do.
Do you have any other clients that were based out of China or came from China? Was this your only client that was Chinese?
Correct, yes.
And the clients you were working for out of Queens, were they Chinese?
Yes.
Okay, were they American citizens?
They were legal permanent residents, yes.
Okay, they were legal permanent residents, and they were duly licensed to do operations in the United States.
They were citizens living in the United States. I don't know, as far as they weren't, as far as I know, doing operations. My take on when I met them, that they were living in Queens and Connecticut, and they were part of this family construction business that had the money stolen from them.
But the construction business was in China?
Yes.
And what were they doing living in the United States, I guess, is a question, and I'll ask you that after the break. Now, Mike's wife says the DOJ knew what they were doing, and they knew that it was wrong. This wasn't like they were confused, they misread the law. They knew what they were doing, they knew it was wrong, but they went after her husband anyway, and she's going to tell us what she discovered when she started digging, when she joins the conversation after the break. With so much going on in your life, it can be easy to neglect your diet. Balance of Nature fruits and veggies supplements have 31 ingredients made from fruits and vegetables. They're a fast and simple way to get a wide and colorful variety that fits right into your busy schedule. Just 3 fruits and 3 veggies supplements daily with some water, that's it. Whether you're off to spend time with your grandchildren or on your favorite hike, you can rely on these convenient supplements to be there every step of the way. Start your journey with Balance of Nature. Call 1-800-246-8751 or go to balanceofnature.com to get a free fiber and spice supplement, plus 35% off your first preferred set as a new preferred customer with free shipping and our money-back guarantee. Go to balanceofnature.com or call 1-800-246-8751 and get this special offer by using discount code Dr. Phil. That's DRPHIL. You've heard me talk about Jace Medical. If not, listen up, because they're doing incredible work in medical preparedness. And today, I've got 2 major updates to share. First up, the ivermectin use case. You've probably seen the headlines calling it a wonder drug. The scientist who discovered it even won a Nobel Prize, and now Jace is offering a 30-day supply at the best price you'll find anywhere. Next, the upgraded Jace case, an emergency supply of antibiotics delivered to your door. They've doubled the number of medications to 10 at just $20 more. And now, the most comprehensive and affordable kit available. Get it before you need it. Don't wait, order today. Visit jace.com and use code PHIL at checkout for a special discount. That's JASE.com, code PHIL.
I conducted legal PI work, private investigation work in New Jersey. And then 4 years later, in 2020, the FBI came to my house, banged on my door with 12 agents, surrounded my house, and they arrested me for working for the Chinese government. Here I am today. I had a trial, I was convicted, and I'm shocked.
Well, that was Mike McMahon, a decorated NYPD officer now convicted of working as a foreign agent for China. But his wife, Emmy Award-winning actress Martha Byrne, says this case was never about China. She says her husband was targeted, the evidence twisted, and the truth buried. So, Martha, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Dr. Phil. Thank you so much.
You say that this whole thing has nothing to do with China. When Mike was arrested in 2020, what was your initial reaction?
Shock. I've been married to Michael McMahon for 31 years. He's a hero. He's the guy that goes into the burning buildings. He takes on gunfire. He helps people. He's not anyone who would ever hurt anyone, So when they come to your house at pre-dawn and this happened and they take away your husband and traumatize your children, there's no way he would do anything wrong. So when he came back from being processed, we pulled out all his emails. He had notified the local police when he was doing surveillance. He saved every invoice, every text message, and I saw he had never done it. He didn't do anything illegal. So we fought back. But here we go, Dr. Phil, the media's outside our house. They're following my children. There's drones over our home. And I could not believe it. There must have been something else going on here, that they went after my husband, because he is the one person that would never harm anybody. So the accusations were outrageous. He would never work for a foreign adversary for a few $1,000s. I mean, this is not him. So I started putting the pieces together and starting looking into more about this case. And it turned out the subject he was following had a $30 million civil lawsuit against him in New Jersey. He was a Wuhan official who had fled here. He was not a dissident. There was so much about the subject that I finally could learn after his arrest in 2020. Because when he was arrested when he worked on the case in 2016, there was nothing about that was available. So here we go, thinking, why are they doing this to my husband? We're going to fight back as a family after what they did. And Dr. Phil, they had illegal search warrants on my family. They spied on us. They looked at our emails. They were digging through every personal aspect of our lives. I was angry. I was scared. I was traumatized. And I started speaking publicly about this case to protect my family. And he did nothing illegal. So we fought back and went to trial. And Dr. Phil, I have never in my life heard the gymnastics that the prosecutors and the New York FBI office went to take an innocent man and make him look guilty to win a case. And we've heard this before, and I know you have, about how the DOJ will suppress evidence, they will manufacture evidence, anything to get a win. But to do it to a man who's a hero, who would never harm anybody, and to sacrifice him and my family and not protect us, but work with CCP agents and talk to them, and which is what they were doing for 4 years. I'm still in shock, but I have to tell you something that's very important. When they came to my house pre-dawn to take my husband's name is Michael McMahon. When they were banging on the door and they were saying, Michael McMahon, my son has the same name as my husband. And I don't know about you, when the door rings before dawn and you have children, you think your child is dead. So for about, 90 seconds, I was preparing myself that my son was dead.
It's got to be shocking in the early morning when that happens. Let me ask you something. Why do you think they picked him? You say it's not about what they say it was about. What was it about?
I think that he was the only American. I think that he was a PI who had a sole proprietor of his business, and they wanted to make an example of private investigators instead of actually doing some sort of bigger case on, because private investigators were involved in several of these cases, many of these fox hunt cases, and none of them were arrested, Dr. Phil, none. And when I did my investigation to try to find out who those PIs were, they were masked by the DOJ. I couldn't find information. So the FBI, Christopher Wray, and the DOJ used my husband because he's an NYPD hero. That makes the news. His picture was all over the paper, not the other co-defendants, him in his uniform. I mean, to take the NYPD and put it through the shredder for their optics because of this case is outrageous. So he checked a box as an NYPD. He checked a box as a PI, as an American, because no other Americans are arrested. He was the only PI arrested in these fox hunt cases, the only American arrested. So somebody made a decision to make an example, to say, yes, we arrest Americans too. And they never should have done that. Ever, ever, ever.
We're going to take a break. And when we come back, I'm going to add another voice to this who worked in Chinese counterintelligence. And I'm going to ask you about the name Paul Berggren and how he fits into this. Because what you guys are saying does not add up in terms of how or why they would do this. I work extensively with the NYPD, and I know someone that is as decorated as Michael is here, that doesn't come easy. That is a distinguished career, and there's something wrong here, and I want to get to the bottom of this. When we come back, we're going to add somebody to the conversation that worked in Chinese counterintelligence for over 20 years. He knows how the real fox hunt operation worked. Does he think Mike was part of it? Well, we'll hear what he has to say when we come back. We are in the midst of a brutal allergy season. According to experts, it is longer and more severe than in years past. For many of us, that means sleepless nights, tossing, turning, and sneezing, and the dreaded postnasal drip. That's not even half of it. But there is a solution. Sambrosa night syrups. It's effective. Try it and get your best night's sleep. If you watched my town hall with RFK Jr., then you know Sambrosa is sponsoring Merit TV's Make America Healthy Again campaign. That's because Sambrosa contains no dyes, synthetic colors, or artificial flavors, and no high fructose corn syrup. Just a base of nutrient-rich honey and 7 organic herbs and a small dose of antihistamine that will have you sleeping like a baby. Go to Sambrosa.com and use code MERIT for 25% off your first order. Wake up rested and invigorated. Again, go to Sambrosa.com and use code MERIT for 25% off your first order.
Unfortunately, in recent years, a corrupt group of hacks and radicals within the ranks of the American government weaponized the vast powers of our intelligence and law enforcement agencies to try and thwart the will of the American people. They spied on my campaign, launched one hoax and disinformation operation after another, and did everything within their power to prevent me from becoming the president of the United States. There could be no more heinous betrayal of American values than to use the law to terrorize the innocent and reward the wicked.
Well, that was President Trump accusing the DOJ of weaponizing the law to punish the innocent and protect the powerful. Now, if people start to believe the courts are being used for political payback, trust in the entire system collapses. My next guest spent 23 years inside the FBI, 20 of those focused on Chinese counterintelligence. He knows how real fox hunt operations work, and he says what happened to Mike, well, as I said before the break, just doesn't add up. This is his first national interview, and he's breaking his silence tonight. So I want you to welcome retired FBI agent Kevin Hecht. Kevin, thank you for being here. You've got some insights to this that I really want to hear. What drew your attention to Operation Fox Hunt, and how did your involvement with it begin back in 2016?
Well, Fox Hunt pretty much found me. I had a really large source base. I concentrated solely on Chinese counterintelligence, and you kind of go where the investigations take you. So many of my sources started to tell me about what was happening, that Chinese law enforcement officials were operating on American soil unlawfully. Some of my sources were attorneys. They were telling me that their clients were being harassed by the Chinese. So just in the courses of my normal investigations, Fox Hunt found me.
Was Mike an unwitting participant or a co-conspirator in this, in your opinion? You've looked at it, you've seen the evidence.
In my opinion, he was an unwitting participant.
But was he used by the Chinese government without knowing that he was being used?
Yes, I think what happened here is China was using a front company, and Mr. McMahon thought he was working for the front company, not the PRC. There's a Chinese intelligence organizations have a long history of really only using ethnic Chinese as assets to carry out their operations. I don't know of any circumstances in my career where they used an American Caucasian citizen to further their activities. So this whole situation does not fit any MO of how the Chinese government, how the Chinese intelligence services, or how the Chinese law enforcement services work.
Well, were there questions or due diligence that he could have done if he had been suspicious of this? Were there questions he could have or should have asked if he had smelled a rat here? I'm not saying that anything triggered him to have done that. But if he had, how could he have smoked this out to realize that this wasn't a routine engagement?
I think it would have been very difficult. Look, the best way to keep a secret is to limit the amount of people that know the secret. China knew they were breaking U.S. law. They wanted as few people as possible to know what they were doing. And I think the last thing that they wanted to have was an NYPD decorated officer knowing that they were operating unlawfully, possibly because he would be one of the first people to go to the FBI to report on what was going on. So I think it would be very difficult to smoke out that you were being used by the PRC government unless you intimately had knowledge of how it works. And I think the average citizen does not have that knowledge.
Now, this just stinks to high heaven to me. This just stinks to high heaven. All right, a top lawmaker says Mike's case sets a dangerous precedent for every American. We'll talk to him when we come back.
It is without a doubt that the Department of Justice under Joe Biden was weaponized against Donald Trump and weaponized against conservatives. That is a fact. At the end of the day, what we need are these institutions to not be a respecter of persons because of their political viewpoints or because of who they support, but that the only thing they are concerned about is equal justice under the law.
Well, that was Congressman Byron Donalds calling out what he believes is the political weaponization of the Department of Justice. Now, my next guest is a senior member of Congress and former chairman of the House Rules Committee. After reviewing Mike's case and writing directly to the judge, he's convinced of Mike's innocence. Congressman Pete Sessions of Texas believes this conviction was a mistake and warns that what's happening here should alarm every American. Congressman Sessions, thank you so much for taking time to talk about this.
You bet, Dr. Phil.
What's going on here? This thing just stinks to high heaven to me.
I think it's important for us to note that Michael is not the first person we've heard about many of these investigations by the Department of Justice, where they have made a decision to move forward, not just in their own investigation, but move forward for quite some period of time when they could have intervened in a way that would have added some opportunity for the person which they were trying to get to entrap themselves. And we did not see where Michael entrapped himself. There are not conversations about this. There were not documents about this. He was straightforward from the beginning. And his points that he makes about Byron Donalds, Congressman Donalds, the average person should be able to live their life with knowledge that they can conduct themselves and do their business properly. When you're going to move on a federal investigation, they have techniques, they have metadata, they have the ability to record things that prove that you have knowledge about you doing something wrong or the intent to do something wrong. And we believe that this case was absent that. And so we believe that the Bureau moved forward, the Department of Justice moved forward for quite some time rather than finding a way, even if it's an FBI agent appearing as a third party, to show information to a witness or a person that might be charged that these kinds of activities were going on, and to warn him, to give him some, at least, appearance that the government was going to deal fairly with him. We did not see that. And I think that this Department of Justice and the previous Department of Justice need to be warned that these types of prosecutorial or investigative inquiries need to be fair for someone to convict themselves rather than a preponderance of the evidence from some prosecutor or some investigator tagging people when they had actually no knowledge.
Well, Congressman, you're famous for doing your homework, and you clearly have done it here. He was fully transparent. He notified law enforcement when he was doing surveillance. He was transparent in every way. And when they got into his emails, when they got into, as you say, all the metadata here, there was nothing in the shadows. There was nothing back channel. This was all above board and comported with every other case he had done over the years. There was nothing unusual in his professional conduct in this case compared to all the other cases that he had done over the years. This doesn't seem to be an anomaly. He seemed to be doing this ethically and transparently from start to finish.
As the chairman of government operations for oversight, I have been privy to many people providing us information about how the Department of Justice operated, the procedures which they gave, and it is not unusual where the department would ask questions and a person would completely satisfy the questions, but still had to retain a lawyer. Question after question occurred, but worse than that, even to find out later that they were charged when they had no understanding that they were even involved in a circumstance that would be against the law. And that is why one of the most important elements in law is that if you have knowledge about what you're doing, intent is the word that is used in a court of law. If you have intent, they have to prove intent to get a conviction. And I believe that he, in essence, was taken advantage of, and perhaps as Martha has said, perhaps there was something there. I don't know what the political motivation would be, except that he was a good cop, and New York City is a proud place with proud people.
Well, Pam Bondi, who I have the pleasure of knowing, has ordered prosecutors to stop pursuing criminal prosecutions for Foreign Agents Registration Act, FARA, violations unless they involve conduct similar to more traditional espionage by foreign government actors. And I think a big part of that is because China is so aggressive and conducts the most sophisticated, global, and comprehensive campaign of transnational repression in the world. So they're the past masters at this. This is what they do, and they entrap people into this kind of thing all the time. And you can ask, did he know or should have known that he was involved in this? And as Kevin says, there would be no reason for him to know that, no reason for him to suspect that.
Well, this is where I offer some bit of really what would be professional guidance to the Bureau. They could have intervened with a third person who the Bureau knew and trusted to approach him to make sure that this did appear in his mind. It was at a time where this was not top of mind. It was not apparent to him. And many times when crimes are perpetrated like this, they're taking advantage of people. But I think that if you're going to continue an investigation for a long period of time and move to a conviction, you need to prove a conviction beyond a reasonable doubt. And that is another very simple part of the system that we live within, reasonable doubt. And I find it stunning that they would have found him guilty under these two premises that I believe that was wrong. And that's why we do have an attorney general like Pam Bondi, who will not just guide the Department of Justice in their decision making, but will make sure that they prove their intent, that they also prove this opportunity that has presented itself over and over in federal law enforcement. And I think Pam Bondi's doing the right thing. You started at the beginning of the show talking about confidence that the American people have in law enforcement. It is important that the American people trust the Federal Bureau of Investigation. My father was the fourth director of the FBI, and he came to that job as a result of being one of the country's finest federal judges. He sat in court for 14 years, understood criminal and civil cases. And the Bureau, for it to maintain its high standards, fidelity, bravery, and integrity, they need to make sure that they deal fairly with the people that they're going to be a part of charging. And this is where I think that this administration, Pam Bondi in particular, will guide the Bureau and guide those agents and the Department of Justice, those U.S. attorneys, to a higher standard of making sure that they not only do their homework, but they do the right thing. And there, as the chairman of government operations, I'm aware of at least 10 specific investigations that the Department of Justice led that either led to no conviction, but 4 or 5 years worth of making sure that they continued the investigation. It was called lawfare, where they bled out people even though they had nothing to charge them with, or they took advantage of them and indicted them. And so all these things come to play in the United States of America, where we need to understand that we have to respect law enforcement, but that includes a common sense Department of Justice.
Well, very, very well said. And I think Pam Bondi focuses on getting to justice, not convictions. And those are two very different things, but very well said. And Congressman, I know you have to go, so thank you for taking the time to do this. And
Yes,
I look forward to speaking to you again in the near future. Next, Mike says he never knew he was being used, but he's not the only one. Coming up, hear from another victim who was targeted and extorted and barely escaped. We'll be right back. Transnational oppression is when foreign governments harass or intimidate their citizens living in the U.S. Now, over the past 4 years, there have been more than 60 documented cases of Chinese espionage and repression across 20 states involving tactics like surveillance and intimidation. Mike has been convicted of participating in one of these cases. Just last May, the Senate formally condemned the Chinese government's actions, and the FBI has released interviews with victims to highlight the threat. Let's hear from one of those victims.
It wasn't just a normal day when that call turned my life upside down. The person told me he was with Chinese police and I had committed a serious crime. I was really, really scared. So I went along with what he told me to do. I had to transfer a lot of money to an overseas bank in Hong Kong, travel to another city and hide out for weeks under 24/7 monitoring, cut contact with everyone, and hand over all of my electronic devices. It was so stressful and painful. I felt trapped and saw no escape from that situation.
Mike, you just heard that. That is so far from what you did and what your role was in gathering information here that it's just daylight and dark. That's so apples and oranges. We're not even talking the same ballpark, are we?
No, absolutely not. Completely different. I did surveillance for a couple of days with two other NYPD detectives. They said that was stalking. So they convinced a jury that my legal surveillance was stalking. Nobody saw me on surveillance. The witnesses, the alleged victims testified that I was not stalking them. I was not following them. And in fact, I was off one of the days where the victims said I could possibly be out there working. I was off that day. So I didn't stalk anybody. I didn't harass anybody. I just did my job as a PI with two additional NYPD detectives, and here we are today, which is shocking.
Well, here's what the victim said. The defense, have you ever met McMahon before? No. Defense, have you ever seen him before? No. So you're not a very good stalker.
Yeah, it wasn't me. I didn't stalk them. And their story seems a little coerced, a little rehearsed, with the government. I think they spoke to the government numerous times and created this case of stalking, which never happened.
Yeah, this is a stretch, and it seems like they're holding you to a standard of sussing this out when the Chinese government is very sophisticated at this. Your phone rings. With 2020 hindsight, you can say, well, okay, you should have known this, you should have known that. But I think that's a very unrealistic standard to hold you to. Mike served New York with honor. Now he's days away from prison. Up next, the final word from Mike and what he thinks every American needs to know. Mike, you're how many days away from having to report to prison?
2 weeks.
2 weeks away. And Martha, that's got to be very distressing to you, and Kevin, very frustrating to you, because Martha and Kevin, you're sitting there watching this kind of like I am, thinking, this is not right. Michael, what are you saying to yourself right now, 2 weeks away from having to report?
I feel betrayed by my country. I feel betrayed by the Newark FBI office. They spoke to numerous CCP agents numerous times, and they all lied to the agents. Most of them then fled the country. Some stayed here, were arrested. One guy admitted to lying to the FBI 10 times. And our government used that person to testify at my trial. He didn't testify against me. He testified to some other stuff, but no one testified against me at trial. There were no 302s. There were no investigative reports that said I did anything wrong. So to sit there during this court proceeding, this trial, and have a jury find me guilty was shocking. I couldn't believe it.
It is shocking, but of course, juries judge these things on what they see and hear. And if that's manipulated, then that's the problem. And Judge Pamela Chin's remarks at the sentencing were, I think that there has been a lack of acceptance of responsibility, not for the crime, but for doing something you shouldn't have done and harming people you shouldn't have harmed. Nice opinion, but it's extra legal. It has nothing to do with the law. Final thoughts after the break. You know, the problem that we have in this situation with Mike McMahon here that I think every American needs to be attuned to is that when an agenda is being run other than the law, people can get caught up in a machinery that can be very dangerous. And when politics get into prosecution, when convictions become the goal instead of justice, we can get out of control in a fast hurry. And that's been happening in the last administration. I certainly don't want to see it happen in this administration. And we've got to have a return to justice. And I don't think justice is being served here. And I think everybody that sees this should be outraged, absolutely outraged. We're out of time for tonight. I want to thank all of my guests, Congressman Pete Sessions, Kevin Hecht, Martha, and Michael. Thanks to all of you at home for finding us here on Merit TV. We'll have even more information about tonight's episode on our website, and you may be moved to do something about this, and we're going to tell you how you can do that. You can pick up my new book, We've Got Issues, How You Can Stand Strong for America's Soul and Sanity, everywhere books are sold. And this kind of thing right here is exactly what I'm talking about. Thank you for being here tonight. We'll see you next time. Hey, Dr. Phil here. My network, Merit TV, has it all.
Now, let me blow your mind.
Merit TV's got the news that matters.
The selection of a new pope.
Entertainment you crave.
Busted.
Everybody in a good mood today?
And live events.
Surprise.
What am I, chopped liver?
With serious punch.
Big shots.
Go to merittv.com and download the Merit TV app today.